Welcome, Divine Hearts, and thank you so much for joining us this week. We have a very wonderful guest. She is Elizabeth Wood, and Elizabeth goes by many names. She is a quantum galactic anthropologist. She is a futurist, a seer, a scientist, an oracle, and a living library. And I hope we will be able to delve into some, at least, of these topics today in our conversation. So thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining us today and sharing your open heart with us.
I'm so pleased. It's going to be really beautiful and special.
Thank you. Let's start in the beginning with one of those titles that I mentioned in the introduction, and this quantum galactic anthropologist, and to ask you, what does this mean, and what does this mean for you in the work that you do?
Oh, thank you. So there's a little bit of backstory, because I started out as an applied anthropologist doing culture change theoretical design and prediction models, and otherwise known as futurism, wondering, how does the future really unfold? How does change work? And studying very deeply this change, I noticed these layers of culture that, there's the individual, there's their families, there's their township, all the way out to the global culture. But as these years have gone by, discovering the truth of our history, having a galactic culture too. And so that always really intrigued me. How are human beings affected by the galactic situation we're in? And that is galactic anthropology. I'm not the only one who does galactic and quantum anthropology at all. And I'm so glad that this is a brand new branch of science. There's these two new branches studying the galactic situation that we're in, but also then asking ourselves, how does the quantum world affect change and affect our culture too? And we know that it does because of the observer effect, the way that the observer can affect matter. And so we know that the quantum world is involved in what we create as culture. But how exactly? So there are other people who study this and have written books and are teachers in universities. And so it's quite fun to be able to be part of a new branch of these two new sciences that look at the microcosm of the quantum world, but also the macro of the galactic world, and include it in this huge understanding of who we are as humans. And so that's what those two branches are all about.
Wow. And you've mentioned before in your videos on YouTube and in the work that you do, this the importance of self-inquiry as well. So that really simple but really powerful question of asking, who am I? And that this is the beginning of the process of going into those deeper connections, those deeper galactic connections, because they're nothing to do with what we thought that we were.
It's pretty cool. Yeah. That self-inquiry process comes from not only the anthropological, where we have to, what we do in anthropology is do a split mind. And this concept was developed by Jane Addams during the turn of the century. And she was an incredible sociologist and anthropologist. And those terms didn't even come up at that time yet, but she was an amazing person who developed this split mind concept of, I can objectively look at the world without judgment and notice what's happening in all areas around a subject, valuing every perspective around a subject. But I also can value my own subjective experience as part of the facets of consciousness that might be examining a subject. And so she split the two, objective and subjective. We value our subjective feelings as a person, but we also don't lean on them or depend on them to objectively understand reality around us. And this is mysticism as well. So again, as we are in this age of both spiritual and scientific linking, the inquiry process has been well established in many, many mystical schools already. And they do something quite similar, but it's always the, who am I? Am I this body? No. Am I this personality? Am I the situation I'm in? Am I an angry victim? Am I a tyrant? Who am I? And often you'll find that the answer is always no, until you get to the source field, the source from which all things come, the thing that never changes. There's only one thing that doesn't change, and that's the source field, or what we might call source God. And so then we discover, oh, well, I am that, which means that all things around me, I am also. And that's the end of disconnect. That's the beginning of oneness and the mindset of oneness, which creates dramatic changes in consciousness and dramatic changes in the body. But this is this very fascinating and complex path that starts out with that question, who am I? It sounds simple, but the journey is so incredible and very deep and very intriguing.
Absolutely. Oh, Elizabeth, you are truly a living library. There's so many juicy things that we can be discussing. So we'll come back to the science and the evolution that's taking place within us a bit later. But I wanted to take you back to your childhood first, because you've experienced so many interactions, communications with other frequencies, beings, multidimensional beings, and this all began for you when you were a child, especially with the angelic realm. And I know that you had several angelic beings that you called friends. And so it would be wonderful to take you back to some of those experiences. Maybe when did they appear? Were they always there? Or did they come in a bit later for you? And maybe with high insight today, what you feel that connection was all about?
That's a special question. Thank you for asking it. So I've always seen all the realms, all the dimensions of consciousness. And so when I was really little, I could see much, much more than everyone else in the room. So like, let's say, in a normal family situation, and I'm the oldest of 7 kids. So there's lots of children around. But let's say we go real back far in time, where I was growing up in Germany and a military base. And I remember going to kindergarten there in Germany, and the room was full of many beings. In fact, there were more other dimensional beings in that room than there were people. And it always fascinated me, because I thought everybody saw what I was seeing. And that's obviously not the case. But I would point them out. I would point out that there's a whole lot more going on than people are noticing. And that kind of created this pattern in my life where people were like, well, what's wrong with her? And it wasn't so much like they thought I was ill, it's that they knew I was different. So that created an interesting complex, and I kept my mouth shut most of the time about what I was seeing, unless it was to my parents, because my parents believed me, and I was very blessed to have parents that believed me. Now, the angels were always there, and I really couldn't have imagined living without them around. And the 7 that were with me, they were very deeply involved in my life and guided me every day, and would often guide me into discovering the truth of our history, for example. So I might be learning some history, and they would be letting me know over my shoulder, hey, that number is wrong. Humans aren't 100,000 years old. And I'd be like, yeah, I know, but I got to write this on a test. Like, I realize that, but I have to get an A on this test, so I have to put this down even though I know it's a lie. And they were often urging me to look at the truth. Now, they'd never give me unsolicited information. That's not really their style, but they would guide me, and they'd guide me through dreams. They'd guide me in person. And it took a long, long time for me to finally ask one day, well, I was 30 years old, and I said, how come you all have never asked me any questions? They'd never asked me a single question in 30 years. And it dawned on me like, oh, what does this mean? And so I thought, well, they seem to want me to be safe because they've saved my life a whole bunch of times. They've saved my family's lives. Like, this is clearly something bigger than I understand. So I spent a whole year at 30 years old dictating out in deep clarity exactly what the angelic history is all about. And every day I'd sit with them and I'd ask them questions, and I'd get them to clarify what their history was all about, why they were even here at all. And it, you know, if you really ask the angels, they'll say, we want to go home. And they don't want to be here. They don't want to follow us around and save our butts all the time. They would like to go home and experience the oneness that they had before with their brethren, who we would call the demons. And so they're here trying to get all their brothers off the planet so they can go home. There's an angel agenda. And it's not a human agenda. It happens to be an agenda that supports our sovereignty and our empowerment. And that's when I finally said, thank you. Thank you for helping me understand. And that being said, you don't need to stick around and worry about my sovereignty anymore. I'm well on track, thanks to your help, to be a sovereign being. And they left. And it was a very weird few years to get used to not having 7 beings around me as like this entourage. And that being said, they do appear regularly to give me information or to warn me about things. Nonetheless, because they're so beautifully loyal and kind and wonderful beings. Now, that being said, I started kind of creating a lexicon of both the angelic, the demonic, and any other multidimensional beings that I came across with over these years. And so, you know, it's about 40 years of witness and experience that's very objective, because I perceive it as part of galactic anthropology to assess the playing ground of consciousness that we're involved in. Some of these folks are our cousins, like beings who have DNA, beings who have humanoid DNA, which are like Pleiadians, Syrians, Arcturians, Orion people, and so many more. And they look like us. They have a head, 2 arms, 2 legs. Even the gray aliens are our cousins. And then we have, of course, beings who are not part of that humanoid piece. And they can come from different galaxies. They can come from different dimensions. They have their own needs and wants and their own agendas. Every one of them do. Unless they're Homo sapien, they're not going to have a Homo sapien agenda. But I'm really interested in what their agendas really are, including any adversaries that we might have. And in the discovery of all this, the one thing that I would want to tell people about it is that when you think that somebody is your enemy, then you do not understand at all what their history is. If you understand their history, you will never see any being in this universe as your enemy. Even if they are hunting you and torturing you and hurting you, you're not understanding the big picture of who they are and why they're here. And when you do, the universal compassion comes in, and you will discover these are not enemies. These are adversaries that simply have not fully understood the big picture that you're involved in too. So, for example, gray aliens have an extremely sad history. They were lost in space for a crazy amount of time. They weren't able to reproduce anymore. They're desperate to reproduce. They're desperate to do the things that they've been doing. And it makes total sense then that they've thrown consent out the window to try to get their needs met. That's a whole other perspective on a race that many of us might call our enemies. So I like to bring us into universal compassion by pointing out that all these beings are very real. They're all very unique. They have incredible histories just like we do. And they're deeply complex beings that deserve to be loved simply because they exist. There is no other requirement for love from source. And that is really key. And that applies to us too. So this piece around sovereignty, around understanding history, that there are no enemies, and that you yourself as a creator can create something very different and new when we interact with these beings. That's how my childhood ended up affecting where I'm at now and why I see the way that I do these particular topics.
You've led up beautifully there to some not so pleasant experiences that you've had, being abducted a few times, but the last and most recent experience that you had brought you to this inner transformation, if you like. You were able to transform from this fear into this love, which is so powerful and such an alchemy. And I don't know if you'd be willing to share that experience and how you moved through it, because it's so helpful for others to be able to feel that and to understand what you did, in a sense.
Absolutely. And a caveat here is, when I speak about these experiences and I sound like I'm not traumatized, it's because I've worked on that trauma. So most people, when they hear someone speak about a traumatic experience, it's extremely uncomfortable for the person to talk about it usually. And that's one of the ways you know they're telling the truth. And so I'm telling the truth, but I'm also healed of my trauma, so I can speak about these things more readily than someone who's still traumatized. It doesn't mean that I'm not telling the truth. But that's a cool way to assess that kind of thing. So my first abduction experience was when I was 17, and the gray aliens took me out of my bedroom, but I didn't stay asleep because my brain's not wired like normal folks. And I'm not on the spectrum so much as my brain's wired as if I'm on psilocybin all the time, actually. So if you scanned my head, it looks like all my connections are all connected to each other, and it doesn't look like a normal brain, basically. That's why I can see so much. That being said, I'm also synesthetic, so all my senses are crossed. So I hear and see sound. I see sound, or everything around time is structured and colored, and I can interact with time in a very 3D way. Very strange things that are difficult to describe, but synesthesia is very powerful and not well understood. So my brain's not wired normally. That's huge, because this caused them a lot of trouble. So I didn't stay awake and they couldn't do anything with me. So they put me back, and it was very scary. And I kept it a big secret for a long time. I think I only told my boyfriend at the time, and he believed me. Then when I was 19, there was an attempted abduction. They tried something else to keep me asleep, and it didn't work again. And the third time was about 4 years ago, and 4 or 5 years ago. And this was a whole other deal. They didn't bother to put me asleep this time. So they took me out of my bed in the middle of the night, and they injected me with something that caused me to be paralyzed but wide awake. But it also caused me to see the immediate past and the immediate present the immediate future at the same time as the present, which is the closest I could describe what madness would feel like. And So they had a hybrid this time. And this hybrid was not a normal looking alien that I'd ever seen ever before. He was brand new and very scary. He was built to look scary. And the little grays were there as well. Well, they were looking for my uterus. They were looking for my eggs. And I had had a hysterectomy about a year before. And so they failed to track any of that, apparently, which really cracked me up at the moment, even though it was deeply traumatic. And it was kind of like a maniacal laughter, like, you all totally screwed this one up. Now I'm useless to you. And I think that the only reason why they were interested in me specifically is because of my skills. That's my guess. I haven't got a chance to, even though I would love to sit down and have conversation with these beings. I haven't been given that opportunity. So they put me back where I was, all drugged up. It took me 4 days to come out of it. And it took me about 9 months for that specific drug to stop messing with my head. But the effects of it were very painful. And after about a week, I was finally well enough to go walk around my house and sit down. You know, my family was witness to all this. It was extremely difficult for them as well. And I asked the hybrid to come back, which sounds completely insane. Why would somebody do that? Well, I'm a collector of knowledge. There's nothing going to keep me from looking at and wanting to know about this hybrid, because I'd never seen him before. And so I invited him back into my home, and he came. I was alone, and he came back. And he was curious, I suppose. And I asked him if I could project my consciousness into his body so that I could understand him better. And at this point, I was not afraid, because I understood that I understood what was going on, and that they had been simply trying to find a way to basically create a new hybrid of sorts. And hybrids suffer very greatly. These are two different kinds of DNA that evolved on very different planets. And when you put these things together, they have very different histories, and these beings suffer immensely. I have many clients who are hybrids. It's an extremely painful way to live. And so I have a lot of compassion for that already. So he allowed me to project my consciousness into his body. And the way that they had built him, he could not feel love or joy. He could only feel what I would call undying hunger. Mm. And it was an endless hunger to finish his job. And I felt so sad for him that he'll never know what joy or love really are. And it opened me up. It cracked me open. My high heart opened up, and I felt very, very painfully sad for this being, very empathetic for this being who, he didn't care about me at all, but it didn't matter. And suddenly I got shot out of his body, and I'm going through the universe, and it was kind of like getting slingshot through the universe. And I'm seeing all these wild looking planets and crazy stuff I'd never seen before. And I hear God's voice, which is not often. I don't hear God's voice regularly at all. And so it was very unusual, you know, maybe a handful of times that's occurred. And I hear God say, Elizabeth, everything has its place. And that's universal compassion. That's that the only requirement for love is existence. It completely shifted my mindset about enemies and adversaries and for and against. And it was the end of a level of duality and polarity in my consciousness in that moment. And that being has never come around again, nor have I been contacted whatsoever. But I do have deep compassion for him. And if he showed up again, I would treat him as my guest, even though he was out to hurt me. And that being said, that is a difficult and painful way to get to universal compassion, but it was the most important event probably in my life that led me to a breakthrough of that level.
A huge breakthrough. Thank you for sharing that, because it assists us to understand the power of love, and that we can find it in these situations that are veiled in this fear, if you like, but just the power of transformation. Because also often when we speak about, oh, come to the heart, be love, it can sound like it's really fluffy, it doesn't hold gravitas, but then there's this deeper level of power and this huge compassion, which is a force unto itself as well. So thank you for sharing that. With the trauma that you mentioned, I know that you have assisted and worked with many hundreds of beings around the planet to assist them with trauma and to identify programs as well. So I wanted to ask you, over time, and possibly through your own experiences also, what have you learned about trauma, and how it interprets itself, possibly in the body or in our behaviors or patternings, and also these programs too, that there might be common themes within these programs within us that you have noticed over time too?
I think that's great. So what I've discovered over all these years and watching many tens of thousands of people use some of the techniques that I've helped to create, the understanding of trauma has become very clear because we're in practice all the time. So we're in a practicum healing trauma constantly. So I always experiment on myself first, because if I can heal, then somebody else can. And, you know, many of us have had lives where we're like, it's amazing I'm even alive. So there's a lot of that attitude. But that's the personal trauma. And then two things that come up are that there's layers to trauma. You might be done with your victimhood, but then you're going to find another layer of victimhood to look at. And you're going to eventually get to a layer where you're like, this isn't even mine. Like, what am I feeling right now? That's a good clue, a benchmark, that you've come finally to your genetic trauma. So if we imagine trauma is actually like a trash bag full of really dense energy, it's consciousness under pressure. All trauma, and that's the second point, all trauma is simply power, light under pressure, consciousness under pressure. And when you're willing to unwrap it, it releases the pressure and you feel a sense of expansiveness. So here's a good example. Let's say that somebody who really hurt you comes in and says, I'm really sorry. I need to apologize for what I've done. And they make an amend, they make a reconciliation. And reconciliation doesn't mean that you forget what happened or that you don't know about the past. It's the other way around. You learn from it. You merge with the knowledge of that trauma. Now, that merger unwraps the trauma. And in that moment, you can feel it. You can feel your whole body expand a little more. Okay, I don't have to play victim right now. I can drop the rope because the tyrant is dropping the rope too. And we're going to reconcile. And that's really a good way to notice when you're healing trauma, that expansive moment, and revel in it and meditate in it and allow it. Now, your trauma trash bags in the house of your body, of your DNA, blocks you from all the dimensions. It blocks you from your inheritance as a human being. it blocks you from remembering who you are. In the who am I discovery process, one of the first things you discover is that you are not your trauma. And so you're willing to go through those trash bags, learn what you can, and then replace them with more and more expansive light and space and the true self, your soul. Now, eventually you'll get to a layer of trash bags that is way thicker than all of your personal trauma. That's when you've hit your genetic trauma. So I've worked with a lot of people who've worked on themselves for decades and decades. Women and men even into their 70s and 80s. And they're like, what am I missing? I've done all my personal work. And I'm like, you're just finally really recognizing that now most of the trauma in your body, written in your body, isn't yours. It's a million years of trauma that have happened on this planet that's written in your body. So go dig in. Now, the good news is that you can assess, let's say, okay, all my family members that I know of have alcoholism, for example. Okay, great. So then there's trauma trash bags of alcoholism, probably really far back in my genetic history, the epigenetic memory. But you can work on all those trash bags at once. You don't need to do one by one like what you did for your personal stuff. The personal stuff, you needed to do that because you were the one who brought those trash bags in into yours. But in this case, then you can say, well, all suffering from famine, all fear of plague, all, whatever, name the trauma, dig into your epigenetic history, your ethnic history. So like I'm part Basque, I'm Dutch, and I'm Scotch-Irish. And that means Vikings. That means the Basque people are direct descendants of the Atlanteans who escaped the tsunami and went north. And that's denoted in their unusual language and their culture. But there's a fear of deep water, like literally, for a reason. That's really deep. And I'm like, where is this coming from? Why am I so afraid of deep water? Like, I like swimming. I'm a good swimmer. And I finally figured out, oh my gosh, no wonder. Of course I'm afraid of deep water. And it's not that I am, it's that my beautiful ancestors were, for good reason. But we can dig into those histories, like Scotch-Irish. Okay, I can't stand tyrannical oppression. That sounds right. I also have difficulty with fearing poverty and starvation. I have that siege warfare marker in my genetic trauma that is going to cause a lot of different issues for me. So we can really go in and follow this line of this special body that you chose to work with and start to clean all that out. Now, once you do that, there's one more layer to deal with. And this isn't so much trauma as it's wisdom that's based in trauma. Because this DNA that we have here on Earth is original DNA, which means it doesn't have galactic memory in it. The only galactic memory you'll have once you clear your trauma is your own soul's memory. Whereas the Syrians, and the Pleiadians, the Arcturians, they all have the galactic memory that spans back many billions of years because they seeded each other's planets with the same DNA. The history didn't go away. That's a lot of trauma. Billions of years of trauma versus a million years of personal or of our human Homo sapien trauma here on Earth. So our job is easier, and that's why the whole situation like this was created. Now, what the Galactics did is they gave us wisdom, the templates of wisdom. You can speak, but you don't know why. You can sing, but you don't know why. You know what pain is, you know what healing is, but you don't know why. The why part is the galactic knowledge, the history. Everybody had to figure this out over billions and billions of years, how to speak, how to sing, how to heal. The original bodies, we didn't know any of that stuff. You had to learn. But that learning is already there, built into us, because these templates of wisdom were given to us. But what were those templates based in? They were based in galactic history and trauma and knowledge. And that means that it's not universal. So it's time for us to recognize, okay, these templates exist in me, but if I'm going to be able to be the new human, the Homo luminous, the human of light, from which only my soul's memory inhabits this body, no other traumas, no other memories, only mine as my soul, then we need to erase those templates too and replace them with universal wisdom that can only come from your soul. So that's the job at hand. And that's why healing trauma is the number one thing you can do. And that it's not a bad thing to have experienced trauma. It's simply consciousness under pressure. And I'm saying this without being light about it, because I too have experienced extreme trauma. But I've learned more compassion, more wisdom than I could have ever learned in those experiences. And so I value them. That's why I say trauma is treasure. And that's true because it leads you to the expansive state of full remembrance of who you are and doing the job at hand, which is to evolve this experience on Earth to the very highest level possible in this galaxy. And we have that opportunity now. And it's never been like this before and never will such an experiment as we're doing now have ever occurred like this. So it's very unique in that situation as well.
Yes. And you've reminded me of some of my childhood experiences or dreams. I used to have really horrifying dreams about aliens and wars, galactic wars. I was really young, and I just remember them being really dramatic and the fear in them. But then now, with high insight, understanding, oh my gosh, so I was working through trauma in my dream state of these galactic memories, cellular memories, DNA, whatever. But it was a galactic trauma that I was sort of working through during that time. So you've just reminded me of that, which I find really fascinating. But also,
that's your soul's memory coming in.
That's the soul coming through.
Yeah. And when you're a little kid, when we're these small kids, we actually remember a lot. And I have crazy memories from my soul history that I was growing up. I remember my mom, I was homeschooled and for a short period of time and went back and forth with a lot of different things. But I was studying the Alexandrian library, and I had constant dreams as a child of my hands burning and me being in a big building trying to pull all these scrolls off the walls while it's all lit on fire. And I had no idea what I was dreaming about until I read about the Library of Alexandria, and I flipped out and I started bawling, and my mom's like, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "They burned the library." I remember it. And that was one of my first realizations, like, wow, I am not what I thought I was. Like, this is not what I think it is. Like, this is much bigger and different. So little kids, they'll remember really well, oftentimes, their soul's history. But it's the soul's history coming in. And that's a clue of just how powerful you, Lois, for example, are as a soul to have such memories come through from the galactic wars. And it, again, like, when you start remembering all your lifetimes, they are very dramatic. It's the mundane and the traumatic stuff that is proof that these are real. And so it's really important for us to recognize that, yeah, if you start remembering everything, you're going to have to heal some trauma from that. So yeah, the trauma healing piece is a lifelong lifestyle. It's not something that stops.
No.
So I remember more and more, but some of it's really rough, and I have to heal that and reconcile that for my soul. Then that trash bag might not be in my body, but it is a memory from my soul's level. So we do have some healing to do,
Yes.
even still after all that cleanup.
I also love how it happens organically. We're sort of led by our soul to these experiences and these activations, that they come in the most exquisite and unexpected ways as well. You were mentioning about Alexandria there at the library. I remember seeing a movie about the story of Hypatia, who was living within those times and connected to the library, and she was a philosopher and everything, and very unique for her time. She was a way shower for her time, because she was a scientist and a philosopher and all these things, and she had students who came to her too. So she was amongst the very few, if not the only female who was doing that work at the time. And then seeing the destruction of the library, that feels, there was a trauma there too that I could feel, and it was a collective, there was something collective there too for many to feel into. But it came through seeing that movie, in a sense, that triggered something that I may not have stumbled upon otherwise, So it's really interesting how these things occur.
Absolutely.
Since we're on this in this topic, how about I'm fascinated with your scientific background and also your perspective as this multidimensional perspective, this oracle perspective as well, on our evolution as a humanity. You've already mentioned that we are, as a species, we are evolving, we're becoming a new species. You've mentioned the Homo luminous, that we are becoming this. I'm filled with so much excitement, because we are literally changing from inside. I feel like all of us that are here at this time have agreed to be a bridge of sorts, so that we are doing the physical transformation of dismantling from this third dimension, the density, and that we're physically doing it on a cellular level. You're talking about the trauma being the block between reaching the multidimensional aspects of our DNA. And so I'm seeing how this is the job that we are doing now. We're doing the transformation. We are the bridge. And how you have mentioned before that science is discovering new systems within the physical body that it didn't know existed before. And how I can't see how science will catch up at this quantum time, this little bridge that we're in, because we're evolving so quickly. And I wondered if you could share a little bit more about this transformation that's occurring within us, to hold more light, to be more love, and how that's affecting the change.
It's really cool.
We are part of.
So there's a situation we're in, and I studied Stephen Jay Gould's work. He's an incredible evolutionary biologist and philosopher. And one of the things that he pointed out about evolution was that evolution really doesn't go slowly over time. It happens in big bursts. And he called it punctuated equilibrium. And that means that it is a moment in time, a temporal punctuation in time, where certain pressures are causing an imbalance. And that imbalance forces evolutionary change to happen really fast. And so it's a fast moment, a punctuation in time that is there to equalize. Now, when we look at the situation we're in right now, we have an immense amount of galactic pressure on humanity right now. The fact that we are not alone in this universe is starting to really make more and more sense to people as a fact. It's scary to them. Most folks don't know how to understand that. They haven't been given the tools they need to be able to manage that kind of mindset. That's where galactic anthropology can come help. Now, The other piece is we have global pressure. It's humanity versus the elite. Like, who knew that would happen? But it's all happening, and it's multidimensional. So we've got, we've got the game of light and dark laid out. There aren't any more cards to play. Everybody knows each other's hand. And the dark still thinks they're going to win. But what they've forgotten is that they are made of light too, which means that light always wins. And so they're throwing everything they've got down on the table. They don't have a whole lot left to play. But there is no war unless you want to act out the war. That's a very seventh dimensional, angels and demons, good versus evil attitude. But as you rise up higher into compassion, into true states of love, there is no war. And that's difficult for folks too, because they've been trained to be used to war, especially in the United States. We've been at war for decades upon decades. We've been at war most of my lifetime, if not all of it. And that's shocking. There are soldiers now, like my brother, who have literally been in combat for 20 straight years, and they don't know what to do with him because they've never had any soldiers like that they've had to help heal who were at war for 20 years. There's nobody like him. So there's all these brand new soldiers who are retiring, having got into the military after 9/11, and they're so traumatized they don't know what to do with these guys. And I work with soldiers intimately to try to help them heal. That's why I bring it up. So we're under pressure. And then of course there's economic pressure. There is pressure around these different kinds of governance that are showing up that are not correct for humanity. Humanity doesn't function in a top-down model at all. We never do. We never did. And then, of course, there's personal pressure. All of your own life, no doubt, is going through layers of shattering. I know it to be so because I speak to many of you regularly, hundreds and thousands of people all over the world. So this is something that's happening to all of us. Furthermore, there is more consciousness pressure because there are more people on this planet than there ever has been in history. There are more souls who have come to incarnate during this end of an age than any other. And it's unlike any other moment in time. We really can't compare it to the end of other ages. And this age is something that no one can truly understand fully because we're in it and it's brand new. But that being said, that's a lot of pressure to cause a punctuation. We are not in a state of equanimity right now. Asymmetry, where there's more of one thing, right now there's more of the darkness, right? Than light. Asymmetry causes movement in consciousness in the universe. It is literally the thing that makes consciousness move. If everything was perfectly symmetrical, we wouldn't be having this conversation at all. And so asymmetry is really important in the universe. And that's what's happening right now. There's more dark, more trauma, more stuff that is wanting to take over fully, and it's caused an immense asymmetry that has never occurred either. It's never been 95% dark all over the earth before. Before, in a different age, there was definitely corruption, but it never hit that level of darkness. So what I perceive is what's called the black wave of consciousness. And this has been prophesized, actually. It's been prophesized in both Catholic prophecy and very ancient text prophecy and indigenous prophecy. The black wave of consciousness. It's that attempt of darkness to overtake all consciousness and own it and run it and completely dominate it. And there's names for this. They call it the transhumanism agenda. And there's many, many names for it. There's just this is a very complex wave of darkness, and it includes people who have been blackmailed into it. It includes people who have been programmed and brainwashed into this stuff. So this is causing this huge wave, and here we are. We're in this state of light. We're trying our best to be in the light, be in love and compassion, and we're not creating a wave that meets this wave. We haven't had time to organize. There's not enough of us. There's that 5% of humanity who's got this clue that we've got trouble. And as this wave comes, this is what's going to happen. As this wave comes, that punctuated equilibrium kicks in. And I mean, this wave's like right here, right now. So this is going to happen over the next year. And what happens is then this core of light, there's a core group of beings on this planet, like you, Lois, and myself, and the listeners, who unify. And because they watch the people around them these are average folks who are good people, unable to fathom what this is that's happening to them. They can't fathom it because it's so multidimensional. And all they know is their life is falling apart. And it's extremely hard for them to function. And that's that deer in the headlights that happens to people when they're being traumatized. You are being traumatized right now. So there's that core of light that rises up. And before this can take over the whole planet, this shatters it. This core of light rises up. Who are they? What is going on there? This is the people who remember who they are. And they stand in unity with the earth, our beautiful mother, and they stand in unity with each other and what we really are, what this really is, the greatest technology perhaps in the universe ever made by the grace of God. And so then we stand not against anything. We stand in divine neutrality, which unleashes grace. This is not something you can fight. You're not going to win a war. It's something that you have to become. There's nothing to do but to be you. That's what will force Homo Luminous into existence through us. And yes, you can become a new species. Absolutely, you can do that. And this is your chance to bring forth the next most powerful punctuated moment in time of evolution, to become that being of light that stands and says, I am impermeable to this darkness. And as it comes down upon us, it shatters. It can't do anything to us because we are not in reaction. We are not playing their game. We are dropping the end of our rope. We won't play victim anymore. We are in divine neutrality and sovereignty. And that's going to create a genetic change in these bodies. And that's what I see. Oh, and it's happening very fast. And I have no idea exactly what kind of timeline we're looking at, but it's upon us. It's here. It's time. And that's what I see right now and why this is so important for us to talk about.
Thank you so much. To close, you now live in South America, in Ecuador, in one of the most verdant and luscious places on the planet. And so if you're happy to share what brought you there and maybe your experiences, your own experience, maybe the family, if you know why you are there, how the communication between you and the land, and to share just a little bit about the magic of Ecuador and you being there too with us.
My pleasure. And this place is in southern Ecuador, where I'm at, is this little town called Vilcabamba. And there is a movement that happens with the Earth's Sushumna, her core of light. Some people might call it the chakra system of the Earth. And it moves at the end of each age. And so we're at the end of this age, and it moved here to the Andes. And where Vilcabamba is actually the high heart of universal compassion, which is part of what drew me here. My teacher lives here, and she's been here for 12 years. And so I definitely wanted to spend more time in training with her. But there's also an immense amount of year-round growing season, so there's constant availability of food. It's a very cash-based society. The Constitution of Ecuador is one of the best in the world. It includes the earth as a sovereign being in the Constitution. It's one of the reasons I like it.
Okay.
Everything here is deeply primordial and deeply intelligent. And at no point in time have I felt like it's not dangerous, because it is. Like you drive on a road and suddenly you're in a flash flood, or rocks are falling. This place is very primordial. And so you need to listen, because you're not the top of the food chain here, man. There are beings of the 3D type and not so 3D type that are definitely bigger than you. But the land itself has a presence, and that presence is something that I've been learning to tap into more, because we purchased a sacred mountain. And although I could feel its sacredness, I came in very naive. This is not my culture. This is not my history. And so coming in, trying to be humble, it's been deeply humbling, and learning how to listen to the earth and let her guide every move I make. And let her, show us our mistakes. And there's been a lot of pain and a lot of difficulty, but there's also been incredible amounts of change and learning and evolution over this past year, probably more than any other place in my whole life. And I've never felt more at home. This particular area escaped the last ice age. So it's a very special place. A lot of the fauna and flora are very ancient and original. And there's trees, for example, on my property that I know are many hundreds upon hundreds of years old, if not 1,000 years old. And they are very present. There's portals. There's so much going on here that is very dramatic and mysterious and cannot be underestimated at all. That being said, the community here is also very powerful. This place attracts incredible people who are very, very talented and conscious, which is another reason why I'm here, because it's unlike any town I've ever lived in. There's been the most interesting, fascinating people who all seem to soul level recognize one another and have a sense of purpose around what they're doing and how to stand in solidarity. And the actions on that are incredible and swift from the community here. And the reason why I would want people to come here, for example, is I'm hoping to, now that the borders are more relaxed, bring in more people to do retreats, mini retreats, longer retreats, get to know the land, have the land help you heal, be able to guide people to some of these power places. And I love the word verdant, because that's true. Like the green here, there's colors of green I've never seen in my life. There's colors of flowers and bugs and the strangest, most amazing animals. It's truly a magical place. Unlike any other, the diversity is incredible. But more than anything, the energies of Ecuador, the high heart of compassion, the heart of the earth is south of here, 2 hours south, in a little town called Valladolid. It's got 3 streets. It doesn't even have a restaurant. Valladolid, and then Palanda, this is an ancient place with ruins there that are made of spirals. There's ancient pyramids that were built at the same time as Giza, and much, much more. There are 30-foot tall human skeletons here from the end of the very first ages of the Lemurians. And they're deeply protected by the indigenous, who have great memory about the beings that came from across the ocean and needed protection and help, and taught them many things. So there's great history here that's only now being fully understood, because everyone ignored the Amazon. Everyone ignored it and said, nah, there's no way there's a civilization there. Oh, yes, there is. And there has been for a very long time. So we're now fully trying to understand all of that. And the people here want to protect it and protect the water here, because it's sacred healing water that comes from the center of the earth. There's a lot of things going on here that I could go on and on and on about how it's worth discovering and why you should come and visit. But there's a reason why people may feel drawn here. And it's often because they themselves need to discover that high heart of compassion, universal compassion in themselves, and allow the shadow, allow it to be fully seen. This place will do that to you. I always tell people who come to visit, I'm like, you really need to be here at least 2 weeks, because the first week you're going to be high as a kite and you're going to be like, this energy is amazing. And then at the end of that week, all your shadow is going to show up and you're going to be like, oh my God, I just want to die. And that's when it gets juicy. That's when it starts getting really good, because then you're like, oh, I'm ready to look at this shadow. And when you do, you reach another level of incredible height and light and power. And so this place will do that for you, to you, whether you like it or not. It's going to happen. And it will happen in cycles. But the land will draw it out of you so that you can heal fully and more completely than you ever dreamed of. This is the kind of nature of such a primordial place. And there's so many others, but it's a blessing now that we have the Shishumna of the earth here, and we can speak directly to that and experience it for ourselves and our healing. And so it's very special to be able to share that. Thank you.
Oh, Elizabeth, thank you so much for being so generous with your sharings and with your heart and with your time. Thank you so much. This has been such a joyous conversation, really enlightening. Thank you so much.
You're a wonderful interviewer. You have a beautiful heart. You're so pure. And I'm excited to be able to support you and be able to speak to all the people who may hear this.